Good morning and a very warm welcome to everyone that's joining us, wherever you may be. Today, very much looking forward to having a discussion all about neurodiversity. To give you a bit of background, my name's Leo. I work in the Golang team at Understanding Recruitment, and we are a technology specialist recruitment agency. And I'm very lucky today to be covering a range of topics. So, looking at first and foremost what neurodiversity is all about, the impact on business and workplace, the benefits of a diverse workplace, and finding out more about this in relation to technology specifically. Um, Very grateful to be joined firstly by Nicole Don, who is the inclusion champion and founder of the Inclusive Network. Also joined by Kate Wardle, who is the learning and development lead at Neurodiversity in Business. So if we could kick off, please, Kate, and just find out a little bit more about actually what neurodiversity is all about.
Thanks, Leo. The term neurodiversity has become increasingly popular over the last few years, but a lot of people still don't quite know what it's about. So it's certainly a term I didn't know 2 years ago, and I am in fact neurodivergent myself, which is part of the journey we found ourselves on. A lot of people are on this journey. So the term neurodiversity refers to having a lot of different neurotypes, including the neurotypicals, such as neurodivergence might refer to autism, ADHD, the ones we're familiar with, but it also may refer to Tourette's. Giftedness is one that's debated, and other neurotypes like that. And generally, the way we look at it, certainly from my perspective at the Neurodiversity in Business charity, is how can we harness the strengths that these different neurotypes bring, rather than focusing perhaps on the stigma of how we thought about these things a few years ago even. And I think the example I use is myself, where, when someone said to me, one of the doctors, "Oh, you're autistic," you immediately think of the stereotype of a small, to be honest, white boy who's 9. And, the definition and the understanding has significantly broadened. So it's around looking at the strengths that we can bring to the workplace. We often focus a lot more if we're very interested. I'm also ADHD, so definitely depends on the topic. My current hyper focus is this charity, so I do a lot of work on this instead of my boring admin, which I'm not very good at. So where you can harness the strengths, people often focus. I'm obviously talking not on behalf of the whole community, but if we are interested in something, we can focus for a lot longer and a lot more obsessively than perhaps neurotypical colleagues, often very creative, particularly people stereotypically who are dyslexic, often bring different methods of solving problems into the workplace, more creative ways of solving problems, and that can bring around significant business advantage. And that's really what I'm interested in as part of the work we do as an industry forum. And it's exciting. It's exciting to see how many people and how many companies are committing to helping foster and accommodate these strengths. So one of my fellow volunteers and colleagues is Nicole, and I'll hand over to Nicole.
Brilliant. And I think just before we hand over, so I know certainly Understanding Recruitment are part of the charity as a corporate member. So do you know sort of loosely how many members you actually have?
Well, we have over 600, and it's amazing because Neurodiversity in Business was only set up last March. It really has hit a nerve between corporates such as yourselves, partners, so people who provide services into this area, and individuals like myself who are interested in this space. And what it really aims to do is how do we accelerate the rate of change by learning from each other, by creating a community that can share best practice. And certainly that's what we're finding is the more we talk, as you said, recruitment is a major area to focus on. How do you attract more neurodivergent people? And we will get on to talking about this in more detail, but what methodology can we use to improve that?
Absolutely. Sorry, over to you, Nicole.
Hi, my name is Nicole Don. I am founder of the Inclusive Workplace, which is a very fledgling consultancy service, harnessing on my own experience with neurodiversity and learning, as Kate said, along with the rest of the community, a bit more as we have been progressing. And also looking at ways we can make impactful change for business on a very case-by-case, bespoke basis. So that's what we do. Again, it's a startup. It's very small, but I've also been working with the Neurodiversity and Business charity since its inception, and it's a brilliant, brilliant charity.
Brilliant. And are you able to sort of share a little bit more about sort of the impact on business and the workplace?
Absolutely. So the knowledge and the information that I'm sharing is pretty UK specific. So apologies to anyone joining from somewhere else, but that's where we are here. Understanding neurodiversity as a natural part of the human condition is crucial for employers. That's been agreed upon by various resources, including advice from the CIPD. And just to give you some facts and figures, so at least 10% of the UK population is considered, again, using the labels that we've sort of preempted with, is neurodivergent. So that's the conditions or the behaviors or mind mapping of different ways of thinking, basically. So that's 10% that are struggling in some way or another, potentially, with obstacles that employers or teams may not even be aware of. And some other staggering statistics is only approximately 22% of autistic adults in the UK are in full-time employment. It's not because they're not educated. It's not because they're not bright. It's not because they're not wonderfully productive and innovative members of a team. It's a lot to do with culture and discrimination, stigma, ways of working that aren't presented to them, and just neurodivergent in general. Unemployment is disproportionately high. Again, in the UK, it's around 30 to 40% versus the UK average of 4.3 currently. And dealing with discrimination of an HR review survey, 52% of identified dyslexics surveyed reported experiencing discrimination in the interview process. And 60% of ADHD people surveyed felt that they most likely lost a job due to something to do with their behavioral or different mind thinking or consequences of something to do with their ADHD. And up to 35% of neurodiverse people or neurodivergent people have suffered discrimination at work, according to another survey by Hired. So we're not talking a small percentage. This isn't a fringe topic. This is affecting every workplace, everywhere in the world.
Okay. Thank you for sharing. And perhaps, Kate, you could shed some more light on, I suppose, the actual benefits of a diverse sort of workplace, kind of from the perspective of kind of businesses and candidates.
I think so. I think that really what we're trying to do is change the narrative. So we're not saying we have a medical problem that you need to solve. We're saying that this is a natural genetic wiring of the brain. And the strengths we're seeing are, as I said, things like focus, creativity, and really that's how we want to reframe it, because what we're saying is that there's a huge war on talent. I don't need to tell you guys that. If you can help get the right people into the workplace in the first place, if you can help and support through that journey, you may well be tapping into talent that you didn't know was there. And sometimes the barriers to entry can be high simply because you haven't thought about the accommodations. So that's really where we're saying, think about the business advantage. Business needs more creativity. Think about the fact that neurodivergence as a percentage escalates in technology. So the STEM topics tend to attract the skills, and the discipline tends to be attracted higher percentage of people of science, technology, engineering, and maths. And I mean, that war for technology talent is huge. So even if you don't have a concrete DI policy and you think, how is this relevant to my business? It is, just look at it from the business point of view, if nothing else. In the UK, it's also covered by the Equality Act. And that's an interesting angle because more and more companies are saying, how do we manage this? And that's, I suppose, why we're here.
Okay, thank you. And Nicole, did you have anything you wanted to add on that point? Perhaps specifically with tech as well, tech industry.
Specifically with tech, again, as we're talking, that's what Understanding Recruitment works in. That's your specialty, is in Golang and programming and programmers and highly disciplined, very high skill sets. There's a few industry leaders that really have great programs or have been sort of leading the field in how these workplaces can be adapted or changed or amended. SAP has an Autism at Work program, and their reports productivity gains, quality improvement, boosts in innovative capabilities, broad increases in employee engagement overall. So by being a more inclusive culture, it's actually benefiting those who desperately need it and those who are not necessarily directly affected. JP Morgan Chase had reported a 48% higher productivity from their mixed and neurodiverse team than they did with a similar team without that diversity. Hewlett Packard said that their program showed that neuro-inclusive teams are 30% more productive than the other teams. Employees that are able to be their authentic self at work are 4.4 times more likely to say they're empowered to perform their best. That's Salesforce. So there's all kinds of these untapped ways of not necessarily rolling out a multi-million-pound program. It's about the inclusivity from the core of the company, in not just ethos, but in action.
Mm-hmm. Okay, brilliant. And I suppose looking at how could we kind of do more to promote an inclusive workplace? So what are kind of actionable steps that individuals and businesses can take to make somewhere more inclusive?
I'm happy to jump in on that one.
Yeah.
We've got some fun catchphrases to encompass that as a short summary. So something that we are offering at the Inclusive Workplace is based on these main principles, which is review and renew. Looking back at everything that you offer as a policy, a process, your hiring initiatives, where the gaps are in where you're not able to hire the right candidates or retention issues. When was the last time you reviewed these policies and processes? And then it's time to renew them. And if the answer is, well, this is just the way we've always done it, then it's definitely time. The second one is education. Knowledge is power. The world is changing every single day. There are more conversations and resources available than there ever has been in this space. Leadership teams, managers, and the general workforce can all benefit from this. Right from the entire life cycle of a worker, from pre-hiring, from the job search, and enabling all the levels in your organization to be aware of things like unconscious bias, promoting positive culture, making it ongoing and collective. And the last one of those three is implement. So review and renew, educate, and implement. How do you actually make this part of the fabric of your business, part of the fabric of your organization and community as well? But I'd love for Kate to jump in on implement, because I know she has a wealth of knowledge in this area as well.
Thanks, Nicole. So I think really one point I want to get across is that this isn't something you have to start as a separate initiative. This is really to enhance your current policies. And what we say is if you can design to include neurodivergent people, you actually pick up everyone in the organization, because everyone has days where they need a quieter place. Everyone has days, if you can concede on the recruitment process, for example, you can actually pick up better candidates. They're not necessarily neurodivergent, but one initiative, in fact, one of our members is Sage, and they were saying that their initiative is to try their best to do away with traditional interviewing. So send out the questions in advance. There's no disadvantage to you as the company. You're not trying to trick people. You're not going to get the best out of people if they're anxious. And in fact, something they're doing, which I hadn't heard about before, is letting people who may be anxious visit their offices in advance, so they don't have an hour of wondering how to get there. So that's the type of initiative we're seeing. And my view on it is that it's a big conversation, and companies are all on this journey together. Everyone's at the start of it. So I think companies shouldn't feel under significant pressure to solve the whole employee life cycle. But there are very simple steps that you can start with. And one of the very first steps is talking. So many companies are setting up employee resource groups. Find out what your employees need before you spend a fortune on a consultant who's trying to fix all angles. Recruitment is a very, if you just sit down and think through your process, is your material accessible? Are your fonts big enough? Have you thought about your color contrast? Even simple initiatives can really make a huge difference to someone who may be struggling otherwise to access a job. And they may well have the skills, but if that's a barrier, it's something you can solve for. So that's what we're seeing. We're seeing a huge interest, and it's very encouraging. Big companies, small companies are really taking the time to think this through. And as the mom of 2 neurodivergent children, which is what sort of started me on this path, I find it hugely reassuring that my kids will hopefully have a smoother entrance to the workplace that'll harness their skills without judgment. I'm thinking particularly of my 9-year-old who never stops talking. So that's sort of our take on it. We're seeing a lot of talk and a lot of people really coming together to share that best practice and understanding that we're all doing this together. It's a start of a journey.
Sure. And you mentioned, of course, your 2 children. Are their schools kind of doing anything to help sort of with this, or kind of learn more about how they can help guide sort of children into the workplace?
So it's certainly something. I think that a lot of this awareness is being driven by schools and children and parents who are not prepared to settle for their children being made to feel inferior or stupid or slow. And I think parents' advocacy has really pushed this conversation forward. I mean, certainly Neurodiversity in Business was set up by Dan Harris, whose son is nonverbal autistic, and he said Joshi is going to have access to the workplace. So I do believe that there's a long way to go, and there's not enough schooling, and there's not enough resource. But nonetheless, I think that it is progressing the conversation. I think there's still a gap at that sort of graduate recruitment level, and I think that is something to focus on. I think that's a great opportunity. And I just think there's things like, for example, Nicole was instrumental as a volunteer in building our resource hub. It's a free resource on our website. You can pull all key information out. It's just about sharing information freely. And my motivation in this is just to create awareness, to have these types of conversations. And I think all companies can start those conversations, because you'll find inevitably someone on your team will either have a child or know their partner or be neurodivergent themselves. And it's hugely reassuring and affirming to just have these conversations.
Brilliant. And we've got just over sort of 10 minutes left. So if anyone does have any questions or anything I'd like, feel free to pop them in the comments section. Someone will certainly get back to you, and then we can cover it if we have time at the end. But I'll hand back over to you, Nicole. So I think it'd be really helpful is, where can we find sort of more information about reasonable adjustments and our responsibilities as employers and as businesses? Where should we sort of start to look for more information?
So there are some wonderful government programs, including Access to Work, which can provide funding for everything from more beneficial keyboards, lighting, software programs that will enhance a worker's ability to do their job well. It's about removing those obstacles. It also offers coaching, which is something that a lot of people can't financially support themselves, but there is a pool of money from the government for these things. And part of the equality charter is reasonable adjustments at work. And there's a ton of resources, again, on this, of course, but about helping that individual find what's going to be their adjustments. In a lot of workplaces, it's great. Again, awareness step by step by step is saying, do you need any reasonable adjustments? And then the next question is, well, what are they and how do we do that? And one of the big things that we preach so much at the Inclusive Workplace is switch the onus from the individual to the employer wherever it is possible. It's impossible for someone who doesn't have a width and breadth of knowledge of what might be available to them to identify what they need. So having something like, knowledge base, we do knowledge workshops just on what is reasonable adjustments. What does that mean? How does that affect your team? Everything from, senior leadership down to employee community groups and discussions on it. What might be included in those reasonable adjustments? They aren't expensive. They aren't going to put a big hole in your yearly budget. Something else we talk about almost every meeting, and people who have been in meetings with me are probably sick of me saying it rather, but inclusion is not intrusion. The things that will be implemented will massively benefit those who need it. And the people who don't need it may not even notice. Just touching on universal design principle of one is curb theory. And that's talking about this curb cut effect is the actual term. It's talking about the curbs on the side of the road used to have a big dip once upon a time. One day when the councils and the government decided to make that change to make more accessibility for physically disabled people, those curbs came down. Not a single person who didn't need them noticed it.
Yep.
But it was life-changing for those who did. And that's what we're talking about on small, big, medium scales throughout a business and throughout an employee's life cycle.
Brilliant. And I think sort of last question from myself is, I think there's, as with lots of things, there's lots of choice, there's lots of different resources and information out there. How do I sort of more as an individual, as someone working in a business, where can I actually access reliable resources?
So I'll pick them. Yeah. So I did mention we've got some online resources. I think one of the big challenges people have, and I often get asked this question, is like, how do I rely on the information? There's so much information. How do I sift through it? And it is, everyone has strong opinions in this space. So what I typically say to people is find first a reliable platform. So you find a lot of interesting articles being posted on LinkedIn, a lot of peer-reviewed articles, and that's the type of stuff we capture on our resource hub. But just read as widely as you can. And people often say to me, but should I be diagnosed? Should I be assessed? And I tend to say, well, just read as much as possible, because if you identify with it, if it resonates with you, then you take that as a framework to help yourself. Because a doctor saying yes, that is you doesn't change your brain. You may benefit if you need medication, but it's really about accepting and challenging your own stigma and bias. And I do think that's really important in the workplace, because advocating for yourself, as Nicole said, is difficult. And the more companies that can just think through the simple steps that may help everyone. Now, the small example I give is think through your PowerPoints, right? Have you bothered to go through an accessibility checker? I didn't even know this existed a year ago. To check the color contrast and the photos. It makes absolutely no difference to most of your colleagues, but the person that relies on a text to voice translator can't use your PowerPoints if they're not checked. So it makes a huge difference to that person. So it is exactly that type of example. Noise cancelling headphones. I shouldn't have to produce a doctor's note to say I can't concentrate. Just make them available. It's not worth your time arguing about the cost. So it's very small things like that we can start to change. But as I say, follow people on LinkedIn, read. It's a journey, and I think if you are recently assessed as neurodivergent, or you know someone who is, it's quite challenging not to almost panic and become reading everything you possibly can and telling everyone, and that's great as well. But it's okay. It's just, if you need to just keep reading and educating yourself, and through that you can educate your colleagues.
And are there, I suppose, for either Kate or Nicole, are there any businesses that you can think of that are setting a really good example that sort of other, companies where we could look basically and say, right, we should be acting more like this company? Are there any that come to mind?
Well, I just wanted to also add to Kate's note about the resource hub. That was developed, over the better part of a year with a huge team and a huge team effort, and that was internally quality assessed by our team at the charity, many of which are neurodivergent themselves. And we tried our best to enable all the best practices and all of that for that hub. So I hate to keep going back to it, but it really is built for the community, by the community, for that particular one. Also, Neurodiversity in Business has an annual conference, which is coming up in April 16th, Kate, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, that's
which
great.
is a massive resource. And speaking to someone like the Inclusive Workplace, who can come in and do mini sessions just to base where you're at, to know what you don't know, and to uncover where you could be improving your policies and processes without even knowing which people are affected. Some great companies that I've got to say are doing it well: IBM, HP.
Yep.
There is another company called Ultranauts. I believe they're American. They credit success and rapid growth to majority of neurodivergent workforce. So they have over 75% autistic or autistic identified employees. And they are very much a strengths-based, positive culture beacon of what things can be like. Microsoft's neurodiversity hiring program is fantastic. Again, it's not just tech. I just have hard statistics on these ones. For example, Kate was saying how some companies will offer you to come into the office and sort of deviate from a traditional interview. On that program, you can go to the Microsoft campus and do a 4-day workshop with them to demonstrate what you can do, to be tangibly involved in what your job will actually be, instead of being a talking head on a Zoom call or in person, talking about yourself, which can be very difficult for not only neurodivergent people, but anyone. So it's all about using them as models, yes, but how can we take the principles and the key ethos of being inclusive in even a micro startup? It's possible.
Brilliant, thank you. Conscious that we are sort of quickly running out of time, so if anyone does have any further sort of thoughts, please leave them in the comments, and be happy to sort of come back to those and answer them afterwards. And I'd also like to say a very big thank you to Nicole and Kate for giving up their time and sharing more with everyone. It's very much appreciated. So thanks very much.
And thank you for having us. All the best.
Our pleasure. Cheers. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
Have a good day.
Bye now.